All right, so this is our final week. I know that obviously JavaScript has been a little bit overwhelming for people that are starting out afresh or new, complete beginners and everything. But I know most of you as well have not even gotten there. When you get to that point, I can do more of one-to-ones with you to explain things some more. So this week we are on our final topic. We are just going to be looking at forms again, and this time around validating forms, promises, debugging, and just we're not going to be doing too much. So, welcome to week 12, our final chapter. I know we've all come a long way from just building out our first what is HTML, in fact, what is the web actually, to now building dynamic interfaces and features with JavaScript. This week now is all about just polishing our skills. We'll complete our first, well, I put full stack here, but it's not necessarily full stack like that, but we'll understand what it means to like make API calls and bring it to our front end. So we can call it full stack, only that we didn't build the server side ourselves. And that would be phase 2 of the software development program, which I'll explain more in detail when at the end of the class. So now the topics we'll be looking at this week is JavaScript form validation. We'll be looking at JSON. I know we touched on it a little bit last week, but I just gave an intro. So we'll be looking more in depth what JSON means or what JSON is. We'll be looking at promises and fetch API. We'll be looking at async await, local storage API. There are more on this, but then when we go into backend, we look at more ways to store things on the browser. For just this phase 1 front end, we're just going to be looking at what local storage is. We'll be looking at Chrome developer tools and how to debug using your Chrome developer tools. I think we already looked at that. We looked at console and then how to use console.log during like testing and understanding what's going on. But I'll just go through more of the Chrome dev tools and what all of them mean and what they are used for. Then we'll be looking at our final projects completion. So the last parts of JavaScript will be adding to our project, and we'll be taking a little bit of look at deployment as well. Hopefully, we are able to cover all of this, but let's keep it moving. Now, form validation using JavaScript. What is form validation? It's just simply checking the user input. When you hear validation to make something valid, what comes to your mind? Basically, when something is in front of you, you want to check the validity that this thing is correct before allowing it to pass a specific process, right? So it's the same thing. You want to check the correctness of what a user is sending before even allowing it to get to your back end. This saves time. This saves, the additional cost of having to make API calls only for the data to be wrong when it hits the back end or the server, and then throw another error from the back end to the front end. Why not just stop the user from the front end if they are not submitting the right data in the first place? It doesn't mean that your back end will not still be built for to check all of those things, but it's just better than to make a whole API call to the back end. That makes sense, right? So this just prevents wrong or even harmful data, and it improves the user experience as well because everything is even faster. The user is not waiting to receive response from the back before knowing that they are making the wrong call to the back end, right? So types of validation, we have client side and we have server side. So it's just basically what I'm explaining. Client side, you do it right here in the front end on the browser using JavaScript. Immediately the user will know they are doing something wrong. While server side, they have to submit that thing first to the back end, and then before they now know they are doing something wrong. So it's basically what we are explaining. So what we are checking for, most times you'll be checking for empty fields. So you make sure that the user is not submitting empty fields when they are not supposed to be submitting empty field. You're making sure that they are submitting the correct format of things. For example, email. Now you want to validate that they are submitting the correct format of email address. Logical inputs, for example, age. You want to make sure that they are not typing 0 or minus something, or like letters even, in case you didn't use like a number field, things like that. Now, best practices. You can use .trim method to clean inputs. You always have to prevent default submission to handle checks, because by default JavaScript treats the unsubmit differently. So anytime you want to create form validation, you always make sure that you want to prevent default submission by calling this method. There's already an inbuilt method. You don't have to do anything. You just call e.prevent default. So event.prevent default, and to prevent the default behavior of how JavaScript and the browser behaves when you want to submit a form. Then use regex. I know we didn't touch on this, but these are like little bits and pieces, like more detail, which is why I left that thing in the last 2 classes, W3 schools. If you want to learn more, like every single tiny bit and pieces of JavaScript, that one will probably even take you months to cover. You can go there. So there are little things that I did not necessarily fixate on, because there are things that will come to you naturally as you are building, as you are getting more curious. But regular expressions, regex, is one of them. So you can use them to format things like email addresses, and we'll look at how to use that. Show clear error messages in the page right there so that the user can see it. Validate both on client and server side. Of course, if just because you are doing validation on the front end doesn't mean that you won't do on the back end. So for additional security and a stronger system and best practices in general, always make sure you are preventing user from submitting wrong data both on the front and the back end. Now, we are going to be looking more into JSON. So JSON simply means JavaScript Object Notation, and it's a lightweight format for storing and exchanging data. So basically, it looks like JavaScript objects. Remember, we treated object last week. We said object, you use curly brackets, open and close it, and then you have the property and the value, right? We looked in depth at objects. So it's just like objects. You can even see object is in the name, JavaScript object notation, but it's just a lighter way format for storing and exchanging data. You usually use it when you're talking to your backend. So you use it everywhere in web development. You cannot really do web development, or you cannot really talk about JavaScript connecting front end to back end without talking about using JSON formats, right? Use it when you're making API calls, databases, configurations, usually use JSON. So it makes it easy to send data between front and back end. And it's language independent. So you can see it in JavaScript. You can see it in, you can see this type of notation too in other programming languages as well. You can use it in when you are testing, even on Postman, which we are going to go into when we go to backend. You see that you're using JSON. When you are calling data from backend, whether you are writing your backend in Node.js, in Python, in any language, you see that things are coming in as JSON. So really, you cannot really do much of backend stuff without understanding JSON. But just know that they make it really simple. They are lightweight, easy to use. It's just like an object, but it's like an object in a string version. We are going to look at this during the practice. Now we are going to look at promises, fetch, async, and await. They all relate. So what is a promise? So when you are making API calls, when I say API calls, when you are trying to make a request to your backend. So promise is JavaScript's way of handling something that can finish now or later, e.g. fetching data from your backend, from your server. So promise will help you handle it, regardless of whether it will finish immediately you are making it or it will take some time to finish. So there are different states of a promise. We have pending, when you make a request and it's still waiting. We have fulfilled, when you make a request and it's now successful, the result have come back. And we have rejected, when you make a request and maybe there's an error that happened somewhere. So these are different states of promises. And then some best practices. It's always good to use try catch. Try catch is just a way of handling errors, right? So that your code can catch any errors coming in to prevent your whole application from crashing or stopping due to an error. Then we have async await. This one is used for making asynchronous calls to your database. And by asynchronous calls, we have two types of operations. We have synchronous and asynchronous. Asynchronous is independent of anything else that's happening. So when I make a request to my backend, right, if I make it an asynchronous call or an asynchronous request, it will not wait until that request returns something. It will continue doing other things on the page. When that request returns something, the request will join other things happening on the page. And that's really the best way to work. You don't want, when you make a call to the back end, your whole page will be on pause. Even if it takes 1 hour or 1 minute for that call to make the request and come back, your whole page will be on standstill. That's bad user experience. So you always want to make sure you are making asynchronous calls. And it's easy. It's literally the same way you will write a normal call to the database, but you just pass async to make JavaScript understand that you're trying to make an asynchronous request to the database, right? So in modern practices, most people use async, and then they use try catch, obviously, to catch their errors properly. Async await is preferred for cleaner and readable code, and that's pretty much it. We are going to take a look at this as well. Then we have local storage. So like I said, we have more ways of storing things in JavaScript. That is storing things that probably come from the back end in JavaScript, but we are going to look more in depth at that when we are treating back end. We have session storage, we have cookies. I'm just looking at local storage for the sake of front end, right? So what is local storage? Local storage is a built-in browser feature. So it comes in with most modern browsers, and it lets you store data on the user's device. So whether they refresh the browser, they close the browser, that data is still always going to be there. So sometimes it can be data like maybe the user's name. Maybe you want to always use the name to greet the user when they come in. Good morning, so and so, right? You can just store that username of property on the browser, and the browser will always, the code will always retrieve it from there to greet the user. So you store it in key value pairs, and it's going to be persistent, like it will persist until you clear it by yourself before it will go. Now, I don't know that this is the most secure way of storing things on the browser. That's why I said we'll look at other stuff that when we enter phase 2. But some of the best practices are just don't store sensitive things like someone's password or IDs or something like that. Use JSON.stringify. So again, the same JSON we are talking about. We are going to look at what this stringify method means to store arrays and objects, and then use JSON.parse when you are reading them so that you can display to the user. Don't use local storage for password. Again, we've said this, or any private sensitive information, any secrets you have coming from database. Don't use local storage for it. But the way to do it is just basically you call local storage.set item, and you set the item you want to set, right? And then when you want to use it, you call local storage.get item. And when you want to remove it, you call .remove item. Or if you want to clear everything, regardless of which item, you just call local storage.clear. So it's just basically commands. Now let's look at debugging and Chrome DevTools. So what is debugging? It's basically just a means to find and fix errors. And I know I've highlighted on some of this to some of you, like this is a core part of being a solid programmer, a solid developer, a solid engineer. You find yourself constantly having to figure out bugs and errors. Is the best way to even to learn, honestly, and don't run away from it. It's something that will help you grow as a developer. So debugging is a core part of development, and part of the qualities of being a good developer is that you know how to find them first. You know what to do to even start finding them and then fixing them in your code so that your code will work as expected. So some common debugging techniques we have, you can read the error message. Normally, when something is crashing or you're having an error in your code, most times you find out that even reading the error first, instead of just panicking because you've seen red everywhere or something is crashing, just reading the error will tell you exactly what is happening. To be honest, it will sometimes tell you the file that the error is happening and the specific line that the issue is happening. And when you go there, sometimes you see that it's just maybe a typo or something, right? Using console.log, we've seen this since we started JavaScript. I've been logging things to my console and printing everything to my console since we started everything we've done. So sometimes when maybe, for example, I'll just give a simple example. Maybe you make a call to the database and you retrieve something and you're trying to use that thing to display on the front end, but it's not displaying at all, or it's not displaying the way you want. You can log that thing you are getting from the back end to the console and see the structure first. Maybe when you see the structure, you understand why it's not working for your front end logic, and you can revisit your logic. Then breaking your codes into smaller parts and testing one step at a time, very important as well. Sometimes when things start to crash like that or throw errors, it makes sense that you isolate the codes, right? For example, what I mean is that maybe something on your front end relies on multiple functions. Sometimes it's good to break each of them function by function, test each function to make sure that you're returning something one step at a time, right? And then comment out some blocks. Sometimes when you are working, this goes hand in hand in breaking into smaller parts. You can comment some parts out and leave one part. Again, let's say one part relies on multiple functions. You can comment the other function, leave one function out. If that function, like the first function that should be called, right? If that function does what it's supposed to do correctly, you know that the problem is not from that function. You comment the next one out. So these are some simple ways. We have, again, we said these things exist. You can use Chrome DevTools to further support your debugging, right? So you can go to inspect and you see all your dev tools. Console is one of them, which I've been using. You can do console.log. We have elements to inspect your HTML elements and your CSS elements live, and you can even tweak some things there to see how some things would look before you go and implement it in your code. We have sources. This one is used to just add breakpoints. Breakpoints is a very important part of debugging as well, although we've not had much reason to use it because it's mostly in back end. You find that you have to add breakpoints and step through your code. So it's just like, it reminds me of this third point, break code into smaller parts, but not quite. So you can add breakpoints at certain parts of your code. And by breakpoints, I don't really know the easiest way to explain it to you guys, but I can use something like this. So if I add this now, I've just added a breakpoint. We are going to look at this down the line. But if JavaScript is reading my code, it's going to stop here, right? And when it stops here, it's because it wants me to use my own hand and go line by line, right? So I would go line by line by line by line by line, and any part of that code that has a problem, it will throw error, and you will know that the line that's through the error is probably where your mistake is coming from. So this is a very important part as well. So we have network as well. You can check your API calls and responses, which is a really good one. I know I mostly use console and network, and if I'm working with the back end, I mostly use breakpoints. So there's some best practices. Use clear and meaningful console messages. So you see that thing I'm always doing where I tend to write where I tend to write console.log, and then I'll put a message just so that when I'm in my console, I will see this and I will know that I'm looking for this value in the console. Because if I put only the value, it's still fine, it would work. But sometimes if you are consoling many things, you will not know which one you are looking out for. So sometimes it's good to put a clear message before you put the thing you want to see, so that once you just see that message, you will know that, okay, this is where I'm looking at. Don't leave logs in production code. So again, this is another part. Console.log is good, but it's not supposed to go into production, right? So before you push any code, make sure you've removed all your console.log. And there are easier ways to do this. There are instructions you can write that will make it detectable in your code when there's any console.log, right? It's going to highlight those parts in your code so that before you push, you will see it. It's going to warn you and tell you, like, you've written a rule that there should be no console left. So, why is this here? Always check the console tab for red errors. Again, let's say, for example, you make an API call and there's an error. If you check your console, you will most likely see it throwing an error there as well. and use dev tools to learn and experiment with live edits. Again, just what we said, use your dev tools, use your console tab, use your elements, use your networks, and so on and so forth. So that's the end of the slide. It's just 7 pages. I wanted to keep it really simple and really quick. Where were we? So we just did last week, the things we did were, yeah, I think we mostly worked on photographers page. Yeah, last week we mostly did this feed page. I think we did something on testimonials as well, which was just, next or previous, and then to just show us people's testimonial. I mean, it was a fake array of testimonials we just created, but yeah. And then we did our photography page where we can, maybe search by name. Yeah, and it will bring out, we can show all of them. We can sort by their experience, and it will start from highest to lowest experience, and we can add in a new photographer, right? We did all of that. Let's just quickly go over it and see if then I don't even remember how we named our images again. Images slash, okay, I'll just do image2.jpg. Okay. And then you can see that the new photographer has been added. And if we sort by experience, obviously. So this is everything we did. I mean, it's all in the code base. It's on GitHub. I also said we'll be touching on deployments, right? So I've deployed our project already, but I'll take you guys through the steps again. But this is our project. It's live now. We have everything we have. And this is our website name, Beautiful Landscape. So we are going to be doing that in this class as well. But yeah, and we'll set it up in a way that anytime we push to GitHub, it's going to automatically rebuild our changes and get back for us the latest on our live website. So we are going to be looking at this as well today. But yeah. So this week, let's see where we are starting from. I think I want to start with form validation. I think that was the first thing we talked about from this week's slide. So when we submit, right, how can we prevent the user? I know for now we are preventing the user somehow because we passed in required. If you guys remember from our contacts.html, we passed in required. This one is the default HTML's way, or is an inbuilt way that HTML has done to prevent users from submitting something if the form is empty, right? But the better way or best practice way of doing this is actually JavaScript. Required is not really modern or standard way. So what we can do first is that we are going to take off all the required from the forms. I'll just remove everywhere I wrote required, and we can use JavaScript to do it. So yeah. The first thing I would do, remember we said in our slide, we said that when you are working on validation, one of the best practice is to show clear in-page error message. So always show your error messages clearly in the page. So I'm going to, if we are going by that rule and that standard, it makes sense that we should create a place where our errors can show. And remember when we do document.getElements by ID and we inject something into that empty HTML element using the ID, that's where we'll be injecting our errors into. So right now, first thing is that I'll be creating where we'll add the errors. So for first name, because I want it in a way that each one that is throwing an error, the error will display somewhere at the bottom in red for each of the fields. That's just how I want to do it. But if you feel like you don't like that, you can do a different logic. So first name, this is an HTML field called small. HTML element called small. I will use it because I want the error to just appear tiny. I mean, you can use any element really and style it the way you want, but I'll just use small. So I'll give it a class called error message. This class will be styled eventually. And then I'll give it an ID. The ID will be first name error, because this is what I'll do, document.getElements by ID, to now get this and inject the first name error between this whenever the input is invalid. So I will do the same for last name, and I'll call it last name error. Pretty much the same thing for all the fields. So if I'm not talking, just know that that's what I'm doing. gender error here. And then we have interest. Interest error. We have inquiry. This one is file upload. So for this one, the person must not upload a file or a picture or something. So I won't leave any strict validation here. I'll just keep it. And then text area. This one is to leave a message. So we definitely want the user, because if you're contacting us, why are you just putting your name and submitting? So we definitely want you to leave something in the message for us. So I'll just call it message error. And then yeah, our submit and reset button as normal. So now we are going to look at the JavaScript side. I'm just going to create a JavaScript file for this, and I'll call it contact.js. And then I'll come in here and I'll link it as normal. And then the src would be js/contact.js. Yeah, we are linking correctly to our file. So now, for the JavaScript side of things, let's start to look at it. The first thing we are going to do, we are going to create a function. Like there are different ways of doing validation. This is just the way I've come up with to do it. It doesn't necessarily have to be this long or complicated, or you can do it any way, to be honest. But I want to write one function that we will just call once, and it's going to do the whole validation. Personally, I feel like it's the most effective or the most efficient way. I'll just create a function and I'll call it init form validation. I know this is still like a traditional function. We talked about arrow functions last week. I'll declare this variable as a constant. The name is form, and I will just use the query selector to get my entire contact form. Remember, we looked at query selector last week. You can use it to get a class name, and you can use the class name to get the entire elements. So if we go to our contact form, where is it? I'll close this for now. If we go to our contact form, if you see the overall form, the name is contact form, and it has everything in our contact form from all of our input fields from start to finish. So that means this dot contact form I've called using query selector now lives inside this variable. I have access to everything in here now. Our entire form is in that variable. Now, I can do a quick check first. I can say if there is no form, return. So this is just extra checks. Again, it's not mandatory, but it's best practice. So first, we are checking that if this form doesn't even exist, don't do anything, like just stop there. Do you get? We can throw an error here if we want, but the point is validating the input fields, not doing anything outside of that. Let's just work within the scope. So this is what I've just used, an if statement. So you're not seeing how everything we have used throughout the weeks is now coming together, or how you can use it in other cases. So we are just doing a simple if check. If there's no form, this is same thing as, writing if there is no form, because I know that we wrote it like this in other weeks. I don't want anyone to get confused. This is the same thing as writing if there's no form. Remember, we wrote it like this, and you can just do return anyway, right? It's the same thing, but because everything is one line, I'm not doing extra stuff in this if statement. I've just put it on one line. So if this form, so when you try to use this class name to get that whole form, if it doesn't exist, just stop. Don't do anything again from there. It's just extra precautionary checks. So now, if there is a form, we'll continue. So that means if it doesn't go here, that means there's a form, right? So it will continue the code. So we can say form dot add event listener. Can this assistance just form dot add event listener? We talked about event listeners last week, and the event listener we want to add on this form is submit, because clearly we want to submit this form somewhere, right? So we are going to be adding our submit event. And if you remember, obviously I know you may or may not remember, but this is what we had done last week, right? You pass in a function, and then this is why we'll do that e.prevent default. E.prevent default, to prevent the default behavior. of the browser when you submit a form. And then I will create a function called clear errors. I've not created the function yet, but just know that I'll create a function called clear errors that I want to pass here. So basically, when this one executes, is going to clear any errors if there are any errors as well displaying on the form currently. That's why I want to do this. Now, continuing on, I want to declare a variable called isValid, and I'll set it to true at first. Now, this is where I will start bringing in all those forms one by one, right? And if there's any error, isValid will become false on that specific input field. So let's start with our first name. So our first name input, I'll just declare a variable called const first name, and I'll do document dot get the elements by ID. And the ID we used on that first name was first name input. It was literally first name, right? So we are trying to get that input field by its ID, first name. Now, just know that there will also be another function. Remember, there will be a function here, clear errors. I'll create it down. Also, I want another function called show errors, which I'll still create down. Show error rather, which I'll still create this function down. So now this first name, this our input field first name now, is now living in this variable. So I can call this variable inside the show error function, right? And then I'm going to also pass in a second argument. So I don't know if you guys are understanding what's going on here, but show error will probably look like something like this. Show error will probably look something like this, right? And then it's going to have any amount of arguments we pass in here is going to have that, right? So this is basically what I'm trying to do. So first name, I'll pass the first name. I will pass first name error, and I will pass the error message. First name is required. I'll just pass it like so. So when this function now will have 3 arguments, right? It's going to probably have 3 arguments when I'm creating it. It's going to be expecting 3 arguments to be valid. And anywhere you call that function, you must pass 3 separate arguments separated by comma. Because the function, when you were creating the function, you explicitly said that it should have 3 arguments or 3 parameters. Basically, that's just what I'm trying to do here. But like I said, I'm not creating the function yet. Let's just keep going. Let's create all of our validation checks. Then I'll go and create. So for first name, I will get the first name by the ID. I will call the show error function, passing the 3 parameters it's expecting, which is basically the input field that is coming from here. The first name error for the error that will be shown in the small that we created, this one, first name error. And then the actual error message that should be shown. Those are the 3 things I want. And then I want to set isValid to false for this particular input. So this same thing, I'm going to do it for others. So I'll just copy and paste where I need to do it, apart from the places where I need to do additional logic. So this will be for last name, and this will be last name, and then we pass last name and last name error, and last name is required, right? Then we'll do for email. So for email now, it's going to be a little bit more complicated because we are going to be doing something called regular expressions, which we touched on. Okay, actually, I didn't get the right elements by the ID. So for email now, what we are going to be doing is a little bit different. First, I'm just going to write a comment on everything that we'll be doing. So we are going to be creating a regular expression, and the regular expression is going to check for a valid basic email structure. Now, it's also going to... So I'm going to write out the regular expression, but I want to explain what everything means in the comments first. So this symbol now, it basically means start of the string. So whatever email the person is passing in, that the start of that. Then this symbol, it basically means... So regular, like I said, regular expression is a whole different topic on its own. If you want to look more into it, you can go to W3 schools and learn regular expressions. But this means one or more characters that are not a space. You see why I'm doing all of this. This is the part before the at. So in your email, so when you are writing email, I hope you know that email address cannot be like you can't do this. This is not a valid email. So this part now is supposed to make sure that the email passes, that there's no space anywhere before the at, in anything that comes before the at. So that's what this part basically does. We are going to probably spend a lot of time on this validation because it's quite long, because the input fields are plenty. Now, the next thing we are going to be looking at is the at itself. So now we want to make sure that, the at, what am I doing equal to? I just need a hyphen. The at symbol must be present in all emails, right? Because this is part of a valid email. Then the next one as well is basically the same thing as the one before this at, where we want to make sure that one or more characters that are not a space. This is the domain name. So basically, this is the like at gmail.com. This is the domain name, like Gmail, right? So like Gmail. So your email usually have whatever at sub whatever dots com, right? So this is what this part indicates. Then this one next. This one we want to is like literally a dot, right? We want to make sure that it contains dots, right? After the domain. And then the next thing we want to do is to check for the whether com or whatever it is, right? So we want to make sure that it's a letter. So we'll do A to Z. And then we also want to make sure it is at least 2 characters. So we are going to pass in 2. So it can be more than 2, because usually I think email addresses are usually like something like this. It cannot be 1 character after the dot. Most email addresses will be like co.uk or .com. So we want to make sure that is in letters, and then also is more than 2 characters, right? So basically, this is what this one is for. So I'll just write the explanation. At least 2 characters. 2 lowercase in particular. Lowercase letters. Let me just put it as letters. Just like com or UK or org, something like that, right? And then finally, we have this $sign, which is the end of the string. So our email is like a string. So now we are going to build out our regular expression. So I'll just call this const email pattern. So you see, I'm using const because I know that these things will not change, right? If I knew that it would change at some point, I will not use const. So now we are going to create it from the top. So our regular expression will live between these 2 quotes, right? And we can now start writing. What did we do first? We did this first, right? Start of the string. So we are going to pass this in. Next, we are going to pass to make sure that 1 or more characters doesn't have space. So next is this, right? Plus. Then we are going to make sure that there is an at. And next, we are going to make sure that the characters after that doesn't have space. So the same thing. Plus. And then next, we are going to make sure that there's literally a dot, right? So we are literally just following everything here, one by one, and passing it to create the pattern our email must follow. So we are not just only checking that it's not empty. We are also checking that it must follow a particular pattern. Now, finally, we are going to make sure that after the dots, the next characters is A to Z, like it's letters, and then it's at least 2, right? And then finally, the end of our, just like how we had the start with this symbol, we also have to indicate the end with the $sign. And that's pretty much it. We have our email pattern now, and we can use these patterns to validate our email. So now let's write the check. So this email now, we use this document.getElements by ID to get. So if email.value .trim is equal to empty. So basically, value. So basically, we are trying to check if our email is empty in the first place, right? We just want to see if there is an email or if there is no email. So if it's empty, we are going to call show error. And remember, show error requires 3 parameters. So we'll pass in the input, which is the email, this variable. We are going to pass in the email error, which is that field that will show the error. and then we are going to pass in the error message, email is required, right? That's it, email is required, like so. Then we are going to say is valid, will be false. Else, if, now I want to check if the email conforms to the pattern. If is not email pattern dot test, this is now how to use our regular expression. So we'll call the regular expression dot test and we'll pass in our email. So email dot value dot stream. Right? So basically, we call our regular expression and we pass in this our email that we are holding here to use the regular expression to test our email. So our email is going to enforce that test on our email. And then, so if it doesn't pass this regular expression, remember we put is not. So if this email doesn't pass this regular expression, that's the meaning of this is not symbol that we put in front. Then we want to show the error again. Again, our show error function expects three parameters. So the email error, and this time around we want to show a different message. Tell the user, please enter a valid email, right? And then is valid will still be false again because it didn't pass, right? So this is pretty much it for the email checks. The next check we are going to be doing is where's this from? Well, the next check we are going to be doing, sorry, I just want to be sure that this function opens this. What opens this one? Oh yeah, this is our event listener. So now the next one I want to do is for phone. We are making progress, but it's slow. So now this one, clearly it must be a required field and it must be 10 digits. Let's just say it that way. It must be 10 digits. So we are going to do a small regular expression on here too. So const phone number, or just say const phone, is equal to documents dot get the elements by ID, and the ID was phone from the input field. And then I'll do a regular expression called phone. Before I do a regular expression, I will just, well, this is not even necessary, but I will just do it. But basically what I tried to do in here, that's what I want to do again. So it's the same thing I did here, dot stream, but I just want to declare it as a variable for phone number. I'm just trying to show different ways of doing things. So phone value, I'm going to get our phone that we are currently holding, dot value dot stream. Dot stream is just a simple method when you're working with like strings or with values. You can use it to remove any white spaces before or after, because sometimes when the user is typing, it's just nice to have. The user can maybe mistakenly enter one white space and start to type. So sometimes you actually, for fields like email that you know that there should not be white space, you want to remove any white space before or after and just get this particular value that that's why I'm using dot trim. It's not, you can skip it, but it's important. It's a nice practice to do. So phone will trim it, and then I'll just comment the regular expression for this. So this regex checks for exactly 10 digits, 0 to 9, because between 0 to 9 is, when you count it, is 10 digits, right? Now, what exactly does it mean? So again, just like before, this means the start of the string. The next one, 0, 9 in square brackets. This just means allows any digit between 0 and 9. The next one, 10 in curly brackets, must be exactly 10 digits long, no more, no less. And then finally, the end of the string. The end of this string. So you see it's similar, but it's just different rules that are going in based on what exactly you are working with. So now, const phone pattern, I'll create a pattern for it using these rules that we wrote. So again, we are going to have the start of this string, allow any digits between 0 and 9, make it exactly 10 characters, no more, no less, and the end of the string. So this is a regular expression now. We have this. So we can now use this regular expression to check against the phone in this our input field coming in. So pretty much exactly the same thing we've done. If phone value, remember phone value is holding this our phone that is coming in from our input field. It's just that it's trimming any white spaces before or after. It's same thing we did for this email pretty much. is taking our email that's coming in from our input field and trimming any white space before or after, just to make sure that we are getting the properly clean data. So if phone value is what? Empty string. So if the user submitted something empty, essentially, what do we want to do? We want to show error, passing the 3 parameters, which is the input itself, phone error, which is that our small error message that we show, and then the actual message we want to show, phone number is required, right? Now, in the else part, well, is valid is also going to be false. Then in the else part, else if rather, not else, else if, so if it doesn't pass the phone pattern check, so if phone pattern dot test, if is not phone pattern dot test, are you seeing the logic? This, remember when we're doing conditionals, sorry, when we're doing operators, we said this is a logical not. This exclamation mark is a logical not. So when you pass something like this in front of something, you are trying to check if is not that thing, right? So if is not phone pattern dot test, and we pass in our phone value. Phone value is basically, again, phone value is just taking our phone and removing any white space, our phone input and removing any white space before or after. So if this phone value doesn't pass this test, that's basically what we've just tried to write here. What do you want to do? You want to show error again, pass in again the phone input itself, phone error, which is that small, and then phone number must be, let's just say 10 digits. This is our error, and then is valid is going to be false. Pretty much we've done that. So now let's do for age. So what do we, age is just going to be simple. It's just, we're going to declare a constant, get the documents, the elements by the ID, we call the age. I'll do const age value is equal to age.value.trim. Again, I'm just removing the white space in case there's any, by mistake, the user added a white space before entering their age, so that I can get the proper data. If age value is empty, so if our age is empty, show error again. And we are going to pass age error, and then age is required, right? And then is valid is going to be false. Else, let's do one more check, because I feel like it's not just about it being empty. We need to do additional checks on here. I know we talked about pass int, to pass a value as an integer. So basically it helps us to literally pass a value as an integer, and if that value is not a valid integer is number, okay, to pass a number rather. So if that value that we are passing is not a valid number, it's going to throw an error. So we want to make sure that it's a number. That's why we call pass int against this. And then we are going to check if is none. I know you guys remember me using some of this terminology. Age number. So if this age number, remember age number is just holding our age value, which is holding the age from the ID, right? So if age number is none, is not a number. So if age is not a number, or this is or operator, where is it? Or age number is less than 18. Let's say we just want only users that are above 18 to be contacting us. Then or age number is greater than 100, because come on, are you contacting us from the other side? So we are just doing valid checks, right, against it. Age number is greater than 100, so we are setting limits here. I know we already kind of set the limits on the stuff itself. Where is it for age? Yeah, we said min and max 18 and 100, but this is just how to do it in JavaScript, which is better, of course. So we want to show error, pass the age, and then let's just say age must be between 18 and 100. Let's just use that. 18 and 100, right? And then is valid. So like I said, this validation is going to take long time, but it's very, very important that you guys know how to do it. Once we are done, once we can finish this validation and get out of the way, the remaining topics, they are not time consuming at all. So this one now is a radio button, if you remember, for gender. So I'm going to say const gender radius is equal to documents. I want to get everything. And I remember in the gender, where is it? We have the name as gender for both of them. So let's see what I can use. I think I'll use, there's another function called query selector all, and you can use it to select multiple values that has the same name, right? So I'm going to do this. So this is how to actually do it. You say inputs, because obviously radio is an input type, right? So you say inputs where the name is gender, right? So basically, what I've just done is that I've used this to target any input field that has any inputs that has a name of gender. So it's going to obviously be looking at these two because these are the only two inputs on this page that has a name value of gender. The rest are sort of age, first name, last name, and the rest. So I've just done that. Now I'll declare another variable. I'll call it gender error, and I'll say document dot get elements by ID, and I will pass in gender error, which is this small. Where is it? This thing here to display our error. This is where we used to inject the error, right? So gender error is there, and then I will just say const gender selected is equal to array.from. So from is another array method. I don't know if we looked at it last week, but I know we looked at array methods. So I'm going to pass in all this gender. Remember, I selected everything and I saved it in this variable. So I'll pass in this variable, right? So that it's going to be sitting inside an array. So male and female basically will be an array. And I'll say dot sum. I know we looked at some of these methods last week. So for each of the radio buttons, I'll just indicate it with an R. So for each of them, do r.checked. So this variable I've declared now, I'm using array.from and I'm passing in the genders in here to convert to an array. Then I will use this dot sum method on the array because it's now an array, right? So I can use any array method on it. So I will just say like dot sum. Basically, I'm doing that so that it will check whether at least, I know we looked at dot sum, it checks for us whether at least one element inside this our array that we now have satisfies a particular condition. And the condition is here, right? And this one is just checking if is selected, that's dot checked. So if at least one of the things inside this array is checked, that's what is going to be sitting in this variable. JavaScript can be like tough sometimes, I get, but when you grasp the idea, you will see that most things will make sense. And the truth of the matter, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say all these things will be in your head 247. Most times, it's just about you knowing the basic concepts. It may not even necessarily be in your head. You find yourself facing some problems that you have to even seek external help from other developers or go online and look for solution or something. But it's always good to know the basic concepts and try first. So now, if there's no gender selected, so if none of them pass this our check here, so at least one of them is not selected, what do we want to do? We want to call this gender error dot text content. So this is, I could have done it the other way I did this one, just show error, but I'm just trying to use different ways. I told you that there are different ways to do validation, right? So I'm going to say I don't want to use show error for now, for here. So I'll just say please select a gender, and then of course is valid will still be false. Then the next one would be interest. Interest is, I think, is a checkbox. We have 3 checkboxes there. So for this one, we also want that at least one checkbox is checked, right? So you must indicate at least one interest. So I can say const interest is equal to documents dot query selector all. I'll use the same thing, and I will select all the inputs where the name is interest. Because if we check our form, we'll see that they all have name of interest, name of interest. So I'm just selecting all the input fields with the name of interest. Right? With the name of interest. And then I'll pass this called checked because it's a checkbox. So I'll pass this value called checked, and then I can do something like what I did for gender. I will just call it interest error, and this one is just going to hold that my small element that is supposed to display the error of that element here. So the next thing will be to check if interest dot length is equal to 0. So I'm now checking now. I'm now checking that if our interest, not interest error, if our interest, so we know we have all the three of them now, all the three check boxes, we have all three of them. So I'm now checking the length of them. If it's 0, that is, and we know we pass dot checked on them. So basically what this line is doing for us is that is getting all our input fields that have a name property of interest and is checking for a checked value against them, because usually once you do this, once you do something like this, behind the scene JavaScript is passing checked, and sorry, HTML is passing checked or unchecked, checked, unchecked. That's the value behind them. So you're now checking now that when I get all the inputs field with a name of interest, check for anyone that has checked in it, and then save everything in this variable for me. So I'm now checking the length of how many interests was checked. If it's only 0, that is nothing was checked, we now want to show an error. So this is where we are going to call interest error. Remember, interest error is holding that our small element, right? And we are going to inject the content of it to be, please select at least one interest. And of course, we are going to be passing is valid as false, right? So the next thing now, I think we have category on that form, which is, sorry, inquiry. Yeah, we have inquiry, general, what here. So I'll just call it inquiry. Inquiry. And is a select drop down. This one I don't think is even going to apply, because the way we build the form, at least one inquiry is always inside at a time. We could have built the form to not select anything at first, but the way we've already built it, at least one is already even there. So I don't even think this will ever error, but it's just always good to have the check regardless, right? So I'm just going to say const category, that's what I'll call it, and say document.getElements by ID, and we want to get the ID. Remember, we call the ID category. If you remember, the label was for category. The label had inquiry type, and then the options, the select around them had an ID of category. So we want to use documents.getElements by ID to get that ID of category. And want to say if category dot value is empty, what do we want to do? I will use that our function. I'll just say category inquiry error. Inquiry error is this one that will show the error for us, where we'll inject the error into, right? And then the type of error, please select an inquiry type. Is valid will be false, of course, right? And then finally, I think we have one for message, which is that text area there. Just say const message is equal to document dot get elements by ID, and I think we call the ID of that text area message. And then if message dot value dot trim, just remove any white spaces before or after. If it's empty, so if the message is empty, we want to do another show error, and we'll call the input message error for that our small element that's going to be showing the error. We pass the message is required, and then is valid is going to be false. So finally, I'm going to do one for submission. Normally, the best way to do it is that when you submit something, right, it should disable the button. When that thing submits successfully, the button can become enabled again. It can either do that, or in fact, when it's making the request to submit the thing, it should disable the button and replace the text with a loader. Like, there are different ways to do it, but for now, because we don't have any real JavaScript and we are not making any real submission to any backend, we are not even going, unless we want to add a delay, we are not going to be able to even experience that. When we start to hook up proper JavaScript backend to front end, we can introduce those proper fancy ways of doing it. For now, I'll just submit the form in an alert. So I will just say if is valid. So if, remember, we kept on setting is valid false for any time any of these throws error. Is valid is false. Remember, is valid was just one variable we declared even before we started doing all these our checks, and it's true. If at any point any of these errors is valid will be false. So on submit, we want to check that if is valid is true, and for is valid to be true, that means none of these has to be false at any point, right? All of these have to have passed. All of these have to be true. none of this should be setting false on is valid for is valid to come and be true. Because remember, code reads top to bottom. So when JavaScript starts to read, it will start reading every line. Okay, to read this, it will read this, it will get here, is valid, is true. Okay, it will get here, it will read this, run the function against those elements, do everything. If there's an error, it will set it to false. When you correct it, it will set it back to true. It will keep doing everything down, 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 down like this. So by the time you get here, if any of this is still false, don't think that is valid. It will go back and see this as true. No. At that point, is valid is going to be false. And remember, we are even using a let. Let is changeable. So it can be true now. At any point, it can be false. At any other point, it can become true again. So finally, we are just checking if is valid. That is, so when you pass things like this, you are just checking if this thing is true. Remember, I said if you pass it like this, you are checking if it's not true. So now we want to check if is valid is true. So after all said and done, if is valid is true, after going through all these steps of validation, what do we want to do? I said for now, we'll just alert a simple message. I will just say form submitted successfully. That's what I will just say. And I will call form.submit function. Right? So now let me build out those other two functions, show error and clear errors. Because remember, we kept on using this show error, but it's not real, we've not built it. And I told you about clear errors that we're going to build this one as well. So I will just call function show error. Remember, we said it expects three parameters: the input itself, the error ID, which is like this small, whatever the ID we put inside it. So I'll just call it error ID, and then the message you want to show. So this is the function. Now I will say input, so the input that is coming in, dots, I will call a JavaScript method. It's called class list dot add. I want to add a class of invalid to it, right? Now I'm going to say again input dot set attributes. This is another JavaScript method, and when I'm done, I'll explain all these things to you. This one is just for accessibility, is actually important, but I'm going to explain all of this. I'll say true, and then I'll say const error. Now we are doing what we want you to show our error. Document dot get elements by ID, and we are getting the error ID. Remember, error ID is any ID that is coming from this place. So when we pass in this error ID, is going to send in at any point, it's either going to be sending, if for example, if it's checking for the category one, like the inquiry one, is going to pass in this ID. If it's checking for name, it will pass in first name. If it's checking for message, to pass in message error, like that. So anything it passes here, we are going to be seeing that in here. And then we are going to say if error, then what we want to do is just one line. So we don't have to do it like this. It's just one line. We're going to say error.text content. So this is where we are now going to be injecting into this small element that has any ID that is being passed in at the time. So text content is equal to message. So the message that is going to be coming in, that's the third parameter, right? It's going to be message. Now this our function is fine. And I made it as a reusable function so that we'll be able to reuse it in all these places that we've reused it, right? So it takes three parameters: the input, the ID of the error, so that's error ID, and message, right? Now, the input is just going to be holding the actual input field. The error ID is going to be holding the elements that the error should show in, and the message is going to be the actual message that you want to display. Now, input.classlist.add is just adding a class called invalid to the inputs. So because I'm calling input, which is the inputs coming in, class_list.add, and I'm adding a class against that input. So I just need to set a class on the input field. That way I can call that class in CSS and style it. I can say make it red or whatever. Now input.set attributes. This one is just for accessibility. It's not mandatory, but it's important that you are always designing your website for accessibility and screen readers, to tell them what the input field is. So when you pass in this set attribute area invalid, is going to be able to tell the on-screen readers that this is an invalid input field. You guess, because it's not everybody. Some people are like visually impaired. They rely on the aid of on-screen readers to help them read. So if they're also entering the wrong thing, you want it to be able to tell them. So it's important to make notes of things like this. And finally, we are just declaring a constant to get the elements by ID. So any error ID that is being passed, maybe for first name error, last name error, is going to hold it in here. And we're just doing a final check if there's an error. So if an error actually exists, just inject it into the text content of the error, the message that is coming in. So whatever message you said, please select this or whatever. you want to set in there. So that's pretty much it. So clear errors. So I'm going to say const inputs. Validation is quite long, especially when you are dealing with lots of input fields. I knew that we were going to face this because when we were creating it from HTML, I knew that it was going to be tough to validate all of this with JavaScript. So query selector. What do I want to select? I want to select specific class names all at once. That's why I'm using query selector all. I want to select my contact form input, which is basically, where is it? So which is basically this contact form. I'm selecting the whole form and any inputs that exist inside them. So contact form, sorry, there's no hyphen. So just contact form, the input of them. So I'm selecting all the input fields, anything that is an input field in contact form. So like this, inputs, inputs, inputs. I'm selecting all this. I'm selecting all the inputs. I also want to select the text area, right? I also want to select the select fields. So these are the three things I want to select. And then, oh, select, and then I'm going to do inputs dot, I'll use a JavaScript method here for each, an array method, because this basically keeps them in an array. So for each of the inputs inside this inputs variable, I want you to do input dot class list. So the same thing we did to make the form, to set a class name of invalid, right? I want to remove. So I did class list dot add. Now I'm doing class list dot remove, because now we are clearing the form. So we want to remove that invalid class that we are adding to them. So I want to remove invalid and replace it with valid. That's essentially what I want to do. And then I also want to remove for on-screen readers as well, because we also set invalid for them. We don't want a case where we forget to remove the attributes for them, and for on-screen readers still telling them that they are still getting an error. So we always have to be remembering everybody. We always have to be including everybody's needs, right? Because it's valid. So aria invalid, the same thing. So I'm removing that attribute the same way I set it here. I'm just calling remove attribute to remove it. And then finally, const errors is equal to document dot query selector all. I'm saying dot error message, which is basically this class. Remember, all this small tag that I added, they have class and they have ID. So I'm getting the class using document dot query selector. So all the classes anywhere that that has a class of query selector, which is basically all our input field, I'm getting it now, right? And then I want to say errors dot for each, right? I want to clear whatever we've injected into them. Now I'm going to say e dot text content is equal to empty. So just clear everything. Now we have all of our validation and all of our functions. The only thing that I think we need to do is write the class names, because I know that we created like invalid, valid class. So we need to write the styles rather, not the class names. Write the styles for them. And I think, yeah, I think that's pretty much all there will be for validation. So we are going to write the styles, and to write the styles, I'll just look for where contact form is, because I like to keep everything around the same area. His contact map form, yeah. Maybe I can do it somewhere here. So I will just say input, so any input field with a class name of invalid. So input.invalid, or rather I'm writing the styles now. So for any one with class name of invalid, and then for text area as well, text area that also has a class name of invalid. These are the styles that will be applied to them. I want the border to be 2 pixels solid red, right? And then another class I want to add is for valid. And then text area valid. I want to add border of 2 pixels solid green. I don't even know if this is even necessary. Then for error message, that is the actual text that should be displayed when the user is submitting a wrong thing. I want the color to be red. I want the font size. I want it very small. So just 0.9 rem. It's fine. So we've done a lot, but after all said and done, we can only check if our validation works. So I've just refreshed the page, and if I say send message, oh, have I not called JavaScript? Is it not the right one? So save contacts.js, save. I called it right script. js/contact.js. So yeah, should actually work. I'll just close it and reopen it, but I don't think that's the issue. Maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe there's something I'm not calling. Yeah, there's something I'm missing somewhere. Oh yeah, I realized that we've not called our function anywhere, actually. We just have the function, but we've not really used init form validation. So for me, I'm not even necessarily calling it on any button. I'll just trigger it right in the JavaScript. I'll say documents.add event listener. So listen for this event, DOM content loaded. So whenever the contents load into the DOM, into the browser, just basically call this function and be waiting for me, so that if the user gets here at any point, this validation automatically has already kicked in as well. Right? So we are just initializing the function. We are loading the function upon when the page loads, whether the user has even done anything or not, so that the function will be already there waiting for us. So let's see if that helps now. So yeah, it's no longer submitting, but there's something else that is preventing it from working. Problem was this: I had error dots for each. Remember, it's errors that I'm using to collect the query selector of any things that have a class name of error message, but I'm typing error dots for each. This is the issue: errors dots for each. And then I also just did an additional, just to make our first name and last name check better, because for all of them we are checking if the value is empty, but for this we did not really check if it was empty. So I'm just doing if first name is empty, show the error; if last name is empty, show the error. So now if we refresh, if the person tries to submit, you can see that most of them now are showing the error. So what we want to type first name, right? So if they try to submit again, you see that the error has cleared from first name, but it's still not allowing them submit because there's still other places they need to fill. And it will keep doing this till the user gets everything right. So for example, if I type the wrong email and I'm typing letters here, this one is already a number field, so it's not even going to allow us type number or anything. It's not even allowing us move below 18, and it's not going to let us move below 100. So the same thing. If I say 29 and then female, interest, photography, or let's not even pick anything for interest. This one, like I said, will never really error out because something is already picked by default. We don't really need to choose an image for now. And then message, let's send. You see that it's still warning us away from the HMM one. It's saying email is required. So let's add a valid email, and then phone number is required. It's not valid. So let's do more than that 10. Age is required. Maybe because I didn't type it. Female, photography. I'll just call this test because at this point. So please match the requested format. Form submitted successfully. It shouldn't even really show the errors at first. So let's send it. It shouldn't show the error when everything is correct. But maybe it's just the logic we've used. We don't have to dwell too much on it. But let's try another one. So you can see that. Let's send message. You see, everything is now valid except this last one that is empty. So now, if we send, it now allows us to send because it's now valid. So that's just all about the form validation. I know it was a long look, but it's something important and we had to do it. Now we can just quickly go through. I know that the meeting might finish. I said we are not supposed to enter 4 meetings, but at this point, can we really help it? What we are doing is really important, and for deployment as well, I would really like you guys to sit through this deployment. So let's just quickly go through the rest. We've gone through the biggest issue, which is validation. Now let's work on portfolio.